You're listening to the Trade Show Insights Podcast, Season 16, Episode 4. I'm your host and exhibit marketing strategist, Marlis Arnold, bringing you tools to improve your exhibit results. On today's episode, brought to you by the Exhibit Marketers Cafe, we've got a rebroadcast of our virtual lunch with Jim Worm, sharing kind of a state of the industry report and where trade shows go from here. Probably, if you've been around the industry for any length of time, you probably are familiar with Jim Worm. You've probably heard him speak. You probably have met him at an event. But in case you don't know Jim, he's had over 35 plus years of trade show marketing and management experience. He's worked on both the show management and the exhibit services side of the business. He's launched and organized trade shows throughout the US and in Europe. And he created and managed some of his own shows. And now he actually utilizes his unique trade show experiences for development and management of the Exhibitor Appointed Contractor Association, or EACA, a trade show industry association dedicated to raising the level of service excellence on the show floor. So, Jim, welcome to Virtual Lunch, and we are very eager to hear your insights of what's going on and how the industry is reopening.
Well, thank you, Marlis. Appreciate being here. And enjoy an opportunity to chat about our industry. Obviously, we've all been doing that a lot since last March, chatting about what's going to happen and when. I don't think any of us would have predicted that February at this point we would still be wondering when things are going to start to reopen again. And that's obviously been a huge hardship for so many in our industry.
Well, and it has been, and I actually, let me switch over here. I came across this infographic from EDPA. And so basically 90% loss of full-time employees. And so it's just been, the average of only 10% of the previous staff is still at a lot of these companies. 6.6 million trade show and exhibition workers remain unemployed. Over 9,000 B2B events were canceled, and 80% of those are small businesses. So it's, the impact has just been incredible. And the one thing that I keep forgetting, because I'm so entrenched in this industry, is people outside our industry really don't have any idea, because the overall unemployment has gone way back down. And so I know, like, a lot of my friends can't understand why, we're still, things aren't back to normal, because for them, their only thing is they just want to get out of the house. So talk a little bit more about, I know some of the shows are starting to reopen. I know Surf Expo held last month in Orlando. I know there's been a number of things held in Orlando. What are some of the other shows that you've heard about that are starting to come back? What are some of the rumblings, I guess, you're hearing about when shows will be up and going again?
Yeah, I let me start first, though, with the other point that you were making about the fact that our industry has been so hard hit, and outside of those of us that do what we do, there's very little understanding of what goes on in the events industry. And recently I was talking to some of our colleagues in the industry that have been working over the last year, trying to get the attention of the federal government related to those numbers that you just shared. Obviously there's a heightened awareness from the very beginning how the pandemic hurt and impacted airline industry and the hotel industry and the restaurant industry, and how they're suffering, and very little understanding at all of how our industry is the engine for all those other three. Our industry is 5 times the size of the automotive industry. And when the automotive industry, back in the recession, was hard hit, Congress quickly reacted for a bailout program for those folks.
True.
and save the industry. So it's one of those things that I think first on the list about the reopening process is not only when events are going to come back, but what's going to be left standing after this is done. And that's what the work of the all those other efforts like the Go Live Together and the Live Events Coalition and all that has just been trying to gain the attention of those that can provide some relief in our federal government for folks that have been out of work really for a year. And if it would be all right, I'd like to start with, the more recent development there is the Exhibitions and Conferences Alliance, which is sort of an outgrowth of what was known as the Go Live Together effort. The Exhibitions and Conferences Alliance is just that. It's going to be an alliance of existing associations. It's not going to be another industry association. It's going to be an alliance of those with the long-term, long-range goal of keeping a consistent presence in Washington, D.C. Among our federal representatives such that they understand better what our industry is about. And maybe some of the languaging that we've been using in the past hasn't served us well. That trade shows and conventions, over the years, decades, has sometimes had the reputation of being the kind of boondoggle type of events that may not have the full support of certain companies that could potentially exhibit because they see it as just being a glad-handing party atmosphere, and that maybe we would be better off as an industry describing ourselves as business events, which is what they are.
True.
Business events that generate business, that fuel the economy, that drive marketplaces and markets. I think that that's something that we'll have to take a look at. But the main goals of the Exhibitions and Conferences Alliance is to maintain a consistent presence there. And part of that first thing that they've done is to hire a VP of Government Affairs, a full-time person who will be working with other players in the marketplace, because lots of associations also have lobbyists in Washington, D.C. So this individual, who his name is Tommy Goodwin, who's come on as of last Tuesday, will be working with those other lobbyists to provide more focus to the effort to gain the kind of relief that our industry needs. And the other main goal that they're going to have is to generate individuals who will be in the local levels, the local markets, Las Vegas and Orlando and Dallas and New York and Chicago, to be local ground level working groups. Because obviously, as you noted, many of the decisions about which venues open and when have been based on a number of different factors. Usually it's based on the state level officials, the elected officials and the health officials in determining what they feel is an appropriate way to approach things. And as I was just on a phone call with the chief operating officer of ASM Global that manages more than 89 different venues across the country, that's the first filter that they have to navigate through, which is the local politics of the state. And beyond that, then it becomes an issue of, what are the other factors that impact an event. Obviously, the regional, local events have a better chance of coming back first because of the travel aspects of being able to get there easily without necessarily having to flying across country, or certainly not flying internationally, which is not wide open at this point. And then the other factor that we note, because we service numbers of trade shows, is their makeup in terms of their ownership. If it's an independent for-profit show organizer, they seem to be a little bit more ambitious than some of the association clients shows.
Yes.
Because they tend to be a little bit more conservatively oriented and have a longer decision-making process than sometimes the independent organizers do.
Well, and that's true. And it is interesting to see that there have been certain, we have a couple of links that I want to have Alan share with us real quick. We've got one that's a TSNN article about the ECA. And so he's going to share that. And then the other one is I came across one from, let's see, who did it? I don't have that in my notes, but it was an article that somebody had put together with a list of all the major convention centers and are they open? Are they not open? When are they opening? I'm not sure. I don't remember if it actually said when, like that it would be that particular article would be updated as they go along, but I would hope that I bookmarked it anyway, so I'm hoping that it's something that they'll keep updated. But it is interesting. It was kind of surprising as I went through that list of convention centers that some of the show or some of the cities that I wouldn't have expected are actually starting to open up again. And then of course, like some of the big ones, Chicago being one of the biggest, has absolutely no idea when they're going to be open again. So, do you have you heard anything else as far as, what, from especially from your contact at ASM, what are they expecting as far as some of these cities that are still pushing back? I know because a lot of show organizers, they're trying to figure out for second half of the year, do they go, do they not go? So what is kind of the interpretation you're getting there?
Well, I guess from a combination of factors, obviously, first factor being the availability of the venue. Um,
Right.
and it varies depending on location. Obviously, Orlando has been pretty wide open. Texas has been fairly wide open. Those kinds of facilities have easier pathways to events. Cities like Chicago, not as obviously on the sort of the other end of the spectrum from that. So that's the first aspect of the reopening process. But the other is going to be, the time frame it takes for organizers to pull events together, because they don't happen in a vacuum, they don't happen overnight. And
True.
that's the challenge. And I had a conversation with a number of organizers last week about that very topic. Having organized events myself, I know what the typical um, time frame involved in putting together a reasonable event is. But having said that, I mean, two examples of events that we work with. One is NAFM, National Association of Food Equipment Managers,
Mm-hmm.
taking place typically scheduled February every other year. They had some great foresight, because as of last May, they moved their dates from February this year to the end of August, which certainly gives them more breathing room. And my contact there said that at this point, they're 50% booked in terms of exhibitor participation, which they're pretty pleased with.
Yeah.
Particularly in an industry like food equipment, where the audience is made up of obviously restaurants as well as institutional facilities and people like that. That industry has been pretty hard hit. They're fairly excited about the opportunity to have the event this year, but it's still the kind of thing where they're sort of withholding their final go no go decision until late May or early June.
Mm-hmm.
They have that kind of setup, because having 50% exhibitor rebooking is great, but it's also the other side of the coin is what kind of audience will they expect to make it worthwhile for those exhibitors. RSNA did a survey of their exhibitors. That's a show that's late November, early December every year after Thanksgiving. How many of their exhibitors are interested in participating? 81% said that they're looking forward to coming. So only 19% said that they didn't think they could make it this year. So
That's really interesting because that's a much higher percentage than what I've been hearing from a lot of other shows. So but it's also really late in the year. And that's another thing that's going to be an issue, is because, like you said, a lot of the February, March, April shows are pushing back to August, September. So it's going to start to get to be a crunch time, because there's not going to be enough venues to go around for a lot of these events to happen. So I think second half of the year is going to be quite interesting on a lot of levels.
yeah,
I want to
potentially very busy. In fact, we've already noticed that our calendar is usually pretty tame in August and September. This year on potential events, it's very crowded.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about the logistics of how this is all going to happen. I mean, because obviously we talked about there's still a huge number of people in the industry that are still either on furlough or, let's face it, I know from talking to a lot of my friends, a lot of them have just left the industry because they had to go get a job elsewhere. So how are we going to ramp back up with the workforce? I mean, have you heard anything as far as what companies are doing to try to get prepared, or how they're going to bring people back on board?
Yeah, at least from the standpoint that I can speak to of our members, those that are in the capacity of an exhibitor appointed contractor, whether it be a company that provides labor services or AV, specialty furnishing, specialty carpet, those kinds of things. While they have lots of folks that are furloughed and have been furloughed for long periods of time, one of the things they do on a regular basis is to do events like this where they reach out to their folks and check in with them to see how they're doing and try to find ways to keep their spirits up, to manage their motivation at some level, and make sure that they have an understanding of what's going to be available when the events do start to reopen. But having said that, many are aware that there's a huge probability that they may be short-staffed when the events come back. So within
Mm-hmm.
our membership, we're already discussing ways in which our members can work in collaboration in those situations to do some resource sharing, so that if one particular member company gets more work in a city than they can handle with the staff that's available, they'll reach out to one of our other members to say, hey, I've got work. If you have people that are still furloughed or on the bench and would like to generate some income, we have some work for them. So there'll be a lot of that going on, I'm pretty sure. Lots of conversations about sharing. One of the things that we recognize too might help to mitigate that demand is that when events do come back, there's a pretty solid thought that they're not going to come back at 100% of what they typically were in the past.
Right.
So the amount of participation will help to mitigate the demand on the resources that are available too.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, like you said, if they're looking at 50 to 75% of the exhibits that they would have had, there'll be less setup, there'll be less logistics as far as the attendees, because I know that even though the exhibits may be coming back, the number of attendees is not going to be nearly as high as it was. And it's interesting because from what I've been hearing, a lot of it's going to be possibly, and I want to hear what you've heard, smaller companies, both exhibiting and also attending, because a lot of the big companies still have the travel restrictions in place. So do you foresee that it's going to be a lot of the exhibits going forward, maybe more the smaller exhibitors than the large ones?
I haven't heard anything specifically about that, but I have heard that the studies were conducted. I know Exhibitor Live did a study where they reached out to some 2,400 exhibit marketers, and that there were lots of travel restrictions available. But part of this story we've seen before. After 9/11, there was a slower rollout of events and slower levels of participation. Travel restrictions were put in place after 9/11 for safety reasons for employees. After the 2008 recession, the same thing happened because of economic concerns and large companies dispensing with what they call discretionary travel, just because they were looking to secure their economic futures. And I think we'll see that again. It's a pretty consistent reaction to events like this. And this one's been obviously more extreme than those other two that I mentioned. So I imagine we'll see some level of travel restrictions stay in place. But one of the things that we will also, I think, enjoy, those that do participate, is while the attendance numbers may not be what is expected, one of the things that folks that do attend as an exhibitor will count on is that the quality of those interactions is going to be much better, because those that do show up obviously are going to be pretty seriously and interested in doing business.
And that is what I've been hearing from the shows that have been starting to happen already. I know I heard from some of the exhibitors at Surf Expo that they felt like that they got a really good return on their investment this year, even though the crowd was, I think only a third of the usual size. So, that is, and that's something I've been trying to tell exhibitors for years. It's not about the numbers. It's about how many quality leads are walking the show floor. So I think that will be, in one way, it'll be a good thing because it'll narrow the field to the people that are really the most serious, because the people that are just walking the aisles collecting freebies aren't going to be coming.
Right.
At least for now. So I want to talk about a couple other things that you kind of have. Well, we haven't really discussed them yet, but we've kind of, one of the big, I think, elephants in the room is the whole vaccine issue. And I think that's one reason why everybody's pushing back is, until the vaccines get distributed. But what are you hearing as far as, do you think there's going to be a lot of shows that are going to require like the vaccine passport or proof of vaccine for people to come? Or is that something that's really been discussed so far?
Well, it's definitely a question that's been out there and is continuing to circulate, but it's a bit early in the process to really know what will happen. But one of the factors that might influence that decision making was a recent study that I became aware of. You've mentioned Surf Expo a couple of times, and then last week, or week before last, I should say, there was a sort of a co-location of events in Orlando around magic. The magic industry, or the garment industry's co-location, which included organizers from Informa and Tarsus and Reed. They decided to pool funds to do an experimental approach to rapid test everybody that wanted to attend the meeting. Certainly wasn't economically feasible to do on an ongoing basis. The costs are as much as $100 a person to do.
Oh, wow.
So for large events, that would be prohibitive. The other thing was that it took up a lot of space. An entire hall was dedicated to the testing process. The rapid tests take about 15 minutes. But the interesting outcome in Orlando was that they looked at the results of Surf Expo, which didn't have any kind of rapid testing protocol, but did have obviously all the GBAC safety protocols in place, mask wearing, distancing, all those kinds of things. And then the Magic test with rapid testing and the GBAC, the results in terms of any kind of cases that appeared, which was less than 0.5%, were the same for both shows.
Interesting.
So, rapid testing didn't improve the level of safety. One would tend to infer that, having had the vaccine probably would be about the same. So, my personal feeling since this all began is that if there was a national requirement that people masked when they went into public places, that we probably could have had events come back way sooner. But since there wasn't any kind of a national agreement, and it's been a state by state, location by location determination, that's why we are where we are today. But as far as whether there'll be vaccines required, evidence of negative testing required, I think that as long as people follow the GBAC safety protocols, hopefully that information becomes more widely known and widely agreed to, because I think that's going to be the way that we'll be doing events once we do start to open up again.
And have you heard I know most of the major centers have already got their GBAC certification. Have you heard nationwide how many convention centers are already GBAC?
I don't have that specific detail in terms of those numbers, but I know that the major facilities have all done that because there are just so many factors involved. And that's going to be the real issue, right? In terms of how we reopen, is how and when we communicate that it's safe for us to do it. Because that's the real hang up, right? It's that we've been classified as a mass gathering. Our industry's been classified as a mass gathering. Well, every time I go into a Costco to shop, I see a mass gathering that people don't seem to have much concern about. Or if you go to an airport, when you do travel, if like over the holidays, those were mass gatherings, that didn't get impeded in any way. So hopefully the effort that's been in play for some time about how events can be done safely will start to catch on, and that those that have restrictions around, large gatherings will recognize that the business events are a lot more of a controlled environment than they think.
Well, and it's good to know that the percentages are staying really low of any issues at the events that are happening because, based on how people have not exactly been following the protocols in general throughout society, it's good to know that they haven't had a lot of problems at the events that the trade shows that have been happening, because that was one thing I was concerned about in the beginning, because who wants to be the one that's the bouncer that's kicking people out for their bad behavior or whatever.
Right.
One last thing I do want to just see if you have any insights on. I came across an article. The U.S. Travel Association is calling for travel and meeting tax credits to offset the cost of attending or hosting. Have you heard much about that? Is that gaining any traction? Do you think that's something that's going to happen?
Yeah, that's probably a little bit down the road. There are lots of other things I think that are in line before that. The one that I think will come up even before that is the cleaning tax credit. That's certainly a bit for venues and organizers, because obviously there's another level of requirement there that they haven't had before. Facilities have had to retrofit their air handling systems such that they could increase the amount of airflow to make sure that any contagions that are in the air get eliminated as quickly as possible. Every facility has had to invest, and as well as the general service contractors, invest in cleaning solutions that will be used on a daily basis. I know that recently one of the large general contractors, I think it was GES, came across a cleaning solution that it will provide a level of safety for 90 days once it's used,
Wow.
which is a good thing. So there's those kinds of things, and the fact that there's a cleaning credit coalition led by the International Sanitary Supply Association that's done some calculations that the costs for both the cleaning materials and the training required to use those can be as much as $5,000 per employee. So
Whoa.
yeah. So, the large organizations have a significant investment in creating the kind of safety that we all want to see when events come back. And so that type of credit, I think, will come along first. Obviously, if there's a tax credit for participation costs, for travel costs to go to events, that would be terrific. But of late, the main things that are on the front burner these days are that the Biden administration's $1.9 trillion relief package, which includes some specific funding for folks in the events industry. There's an amendment that was passed by Congresswoman from Nevada, Cortez Masto, and I forget the Republican co-signer of that, where he was from. But anyway, there is some specific language starting to find its way into these bills for our industry, which I think is pretty important. The other one that's right behind that on the discussion list is the shuttered venues operating grants, which it was mostly about arenas and theaters, but there's been effort to try to also include convention facilities, venues that will also benefit, and not just the venue itself, but those people that make their living working in those venues has been part of the effort that's been going on from a lobbying perspective these days.
And I thought, because I had read an article about that recently too, and I thought that was really great that it was expanding beyond just the venue itself, because it like you said, the ripple effect is so broad. And one of the other stats that I came across was that basically our industry lost 3 times more jobs than the next industry behind, the number 2 industry below us. So it really is, it's such a massive, broad scope. And so it's exciting to see that there actually are some things, some processes that are happening and some advocacy that's happening. So Jim, thank you so much. Any final things, any tidbits that you've heard about that we haven't that we haven't covered so far.
Well, the only other thing you mentioned in your news when you opened up, Marlis, was the mention of hybrid events, and I think that one of the outcomes. I try to do that at the end of every conversation I have with folks like this, whether they be from the venue side of the industry or the organizer side or the contractor side or even the exhibitors and the display producers. Is there a silver lining that might come out of all of this? And I think that the fact that many events have had to embrace virtual as the only sort of place to go as a means of serving their markets is potentially a good thing, and that we might see some hybrid events coming up. Obviously, the ones that have been undertaken thus far haven't really delivered the type of return that exhibitors are looking for, and I think that only makes sense because we're not skilled in that practice, right? We're making that up as we go along as an industry. Folks haven't built hybrid events before. The costs are also pretty significant. So I think moving forward, and you work with exhibitors all the time that try to increase their success at the live face-to-face event. That's still not something that every company does on an excellent level. Many are still in that learning curve. So the learning curve for the virtual process is even going to be steeper. I believe that the more savvy companies will actually have a two-pronged approach moving forward. That they'll have an approach on how to receive and engage the face-to-face prospect, and they'll need an entirely different strategy on how to engage and receive and engage that virtual attendee. Because if they don't, they're just going to miss out. As far as the going rogue thing, I don't know that's something that I would call a trend, because even before the pandemic, there were lots of companies doing their own events, and those were based on issues around cost. That the cost of material handling or the cost of all the other expenses were so high that many companies did already. And we did a study years ago with CMOs of Fortune 500 companies. 45% of those companies all had their own events for those reasons. So I don't think it's a burgeoning trend that's just starting now. It's been something that's been in place for quite some time. And yeah, if there isn't a good solution offered up for a live event engagement or a virtual engagement that's fulfilling and fruitful and delivers value, yeah, then more companies might do it. But there's already a pretty good trend going on for that very thing.
Well, and I think the comment that Rama had said about if they don't see better engagement on the virtual side, they're going to do something else, because it's just, and that's one thing I have seen, sadly, is so few shows did a good job of transitioning to virtual on the exhibitor side. And that's probably a topic for a whole other day, and actually a whole other project I'm working on. But, that is the thing, like you said, as we move to hybrid, it's going to, the exhibitors are going to need to see the value on both sides, the face-to-face and on the virtual side. And I think the shows that figure it out and do a good job of keeping their exhibitors happy on both sides, they're going to have a much stronger future than the shows that, let's face it, some of them have flat out not tried this past year.
I mean, one of those factors that I have heard about in terms of the embracing virtual is that numbers of venues are considering adding broadcast studios to their facility. But like I said, those that haven't tried, I imagine there are many that have considered virtual, but the upfront costs are so significant that it's hard for numbers of them to justify the expense.
Well, and you mentioned the broadcast studios. I know that there's been several convention centers that have already put in place virtual studios, and they're already starting to use them during this time until they can start getting the physical shows back. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things come together. And I'm predicting that there's going to be shows that are going to be merging together to try to put on their events, and so lots of different things. But anyway, as I said before, that I've got another project in the works I'll be sharing soon, so everybody hang on. But Jim, thank you so much. It's always great to talk to you because you have your ear to the ground and you know exactly what's going on in the industry. And I really appreciate that. Thank you, Jim. You can find all the links mentioned during our interview in this episode's show notes at tradeshowinsights.com. And if you'd like to join us for an upcoming virtual lunch, you'll find info on that at exhibitmarketerscafe.com/lunch. If you enjoyed today's episode and would like more, you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive future episodes on your chosen device. Simply search for Trade Show Insights in Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or virtually anywhere else that podcasts are found, then click the subscribe button. Trade Show Insights is protected by the Creative Commons copyright license. You may feel free to share this recording with colleagues or embed it on your own blog as long as it's shared in its entirety and is not used for commercial purposes. To learn more, please see the link in the sidebar of the show notes at tradeshowinsights.com. Well, that's it for this episode of Trade Show Insights. Be sure to check out our show notes and archives at tradeshowinsights.com. You can also connect with me using the social media links or the contact page on the site. I'm Marlis Arnold. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for more tools to improve your exhibit results.